Welcome to The Prize Inside. The Prize Inside. A chiropractor's journey in everyday holistic health and vitality. Here, your host, Dr. Jeremy Myers, delves into the remarkable journeys of everyday people who have embraced the path to health and healing. Through his practice, Dr. Jeremy encounters inspiring stories of profound transformation and the power of true healing within each of us. Stay tuned as we discuss various holistic topics and unlock the healing potential that lies within us all.
Hello, my dear. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Tonight should be fun. I didn't find a lot, so because it kind of I'm hoping it's not too lengthy. I don't have a lot of the article insights prior to, so
okay.
No, that'll be all right. We got a couple of them, but after I got diving into the hip, there's so much good stuff. If you take it from a different perspective, so that's what we're going to do tonight.
Yeah.
We're talk about the whys. It's because it should always be like kind of intriguing that, you have this hip issue or whatever, and you didn't feel it for years. And all of a sudden there's like arthritis in it. And you're like, how did that happen? Yeah. Right. Everything was fine until then. So that's what tonight is going to be about, because it's kind of a very interesting topic, because when I see this, it's kind of a surprise that people have like hip degeneration or, those kind of things. So we're going to walk through like why and how that could have happened, and then some possible holistic ideas of that. Okay. And tonight is going to be kind of about really showing you the difference, right? So I'm going to show you kind of what the data shows is like why a hip degenerates, right? In the medical world, but how is our approach different than that? Because that sometimes to see the perspective, then you can understand like why medical kind of goes down one path and we may take a whole different path, if that makes sense. So the first two are very simple tonight because we got a pretty good talk, I think. But I didn't get a chance. The time was moving a little quicker than I thought. So I only got 2 articles today. So one is daily movement. So daily exercise. Actually, they just did a study that it absolutely improves brain health. So making sure you're doing that as we age. That's one of the things that happens when we retire. We may not do that all the time. So getting that into our focus is a huge deal. Like especially I always talk about this, my retired guys that work 7 days a week, and all of a sudden now they're got retirement. Well, 1 or 2 of those days where they're not moving can cost you pretty big. So that's a pretty big topic. Just remember to keep moving no matter what it is. It's small. It can be as little as you want, but it has to be movement. Okay. Here's one that's very crazy, and I've noticed it as well. Irritable bowel disease, or IBD, is becoming massive in children, which is very concerning, in our health and vitality, right? We shouldn't be having these kind of irritable bowel, Crohn's, those kind of things. And now we're having them, especially in children. One of the big things that I would recommend strongly is a lot of times it's a gut health problem, typically, not all the time, but a lot of people don't think of that as with kids, right? So a lot of times getting your gut microbiome back to where it needs to be can be huge for those kids. But I see it constantly and the biggest culprit, this article says that this is not just me saying it, but over antibiotic use. So over antibiotics kills all the, you got to remember antibiotic. Anti means like kill, right? Get rid of. And biotic is life. Okay. So an antibiotic is anti-life. So it's trying to kill off whatever bacteria is known, because to be honest, sometimes you need an antibiotic. Absolutely. There's no problem with that. But understand there's ramifications of that. back in the 70s, they would actually run, if they gave you an antibiotic, they would chase it with a probiotic. Now, a lot of medical doctors are learning that they should have never gave that up, but that was the thing. We were just giving away antibiotics, and there was no probiotic after. There's some great ways to get your gut back on track. And that can be a huge stepping stone for you. That's something, talk to our office at some point if you ever want to get the gut health right. We've done it a few times now. It's fantastic when people get it. The only bad thing is when I get people's guts right, they start getting afraid of going back, like they're going to fall off the wagon a little too early because of how good they feel after they get their gut bacteria back. So just remember that. So that'll be good. So tonight should be a fun one. Our crowd is cool. I think, oh man, we're getting there, Jamie.
Cool.
6 viewers.
Oh boy.
Comment too. Sue Thomas said hello. Sue.
Hi, Sue.
Well, this is going to be fun. And we've been fighting against some very good NFL playoff football, which is kind of a situation kind of in the United States. So tonight is not that. There's not going to be much happening after next week. Me and Amy will probably take next week off because I think that's the Super Bowl week. I'll keep you guys posted on that. So Super Bowl week, we probably won't have it, even though I could because my Lions aren't in it. They had 17 broken.
Yeah, you're still going to want to watch it.
No. They got Taylor Swift. Never mind. I'm not even going to get into it. How do you have one poor team get 17 broken parts, people? 17 broken parts. That's crazy. The Lions. Reach out to me, man. We'll get you in the holistic world. 17 injuries. There were just injuries. They're like breaks and fractures. I'm like, I'm right down the road, man. I'll come evaluate some stuff, do some blood work, whatever we got to do. And I was like, my God, those guys played so hard, they broke stuff. Anyway, so let's talk about the hip. Tonight's going to be hopefully, it'll be a different perspective to kind of show you what to do. But we got to figure out the why first. We got to understand, why does a hip get arthritis? Like, why does your hip get arthritis, but your shoulder doesn't have it? Why does your hip get arthritis, but your knee didn't have it? Why is that? That should mesmerize people. Shouldn't you have it in every joint? If it's just age-related. Or one of my favorite doctors used to say, you know, he had this patient come in and they're like, oh, doc, my right shoulder's just terrible. It has to be that old Arthur in that right shoulder. I got diagnosed with this right shoulder arthritis. And the doctor would always look at him and go, how old's your left shoulder? He goes, what do you mean? Well, I mean, if arthritis it's this old arthritis and it's all age related, why isn't your left shoulder have problems? And that kind of shows you, it's kind of doesn't make sense what we say, right? So a lot of times these arthritic conditions, these hip arthritises, these things have answers that we can maybe get ahead of prior to those things becoming an issue. So here we go. So it's 1% tribe. Let's talk about the hips, understanding issues and how they arise. Okay, so tonight is one of those where once we get the understanding of what's happening, then we can do a lot of stuff. And that's what's so cool. And it's not going to be stuff, it's things we can do, guys. So that'll be awesome. All right. So where are we going to go over tonight is, let's start from the beginning. How does the hip arthritis come to be? We're going to talk about the whys. Okay. So a lot of times these are focused on, you know, what you can do for them once they're there, but why is it happening in the first place? Or if you're starting to have a hip pain, but maybe no arthritis and all those kind of things, what can we do? What is the why is happening? Do I just have to sit and wait until arthritis comes and then we just get a replacement? Is that how that goes? No, that's the difference. Okay. So why haven't we had okay. So this is something I found. Why haven't we had less hip replacements as our technology and medicine's gotten better and our knowledge has gotten better? So that's something we need to, kind of look at. And I'll show you that information and what we can do physically, emotionally, and chemically to improve our outcomes for a better experience on hip issues. Okay. Because there's parts to this in all phases of life. So just remember that it's far away and as simple or dumb as hip things are. There's a lot there. So tonight is going to be a lot. It's going to be kind of cut and paste. I got a pretty cool presentation, but I also have a bunch of little videos I want to show you just to kind of hopefully give you an idea. So it'll be kind of in and out. So I apologize for that, but I'm that tech savvy, Amy knows. So that's right. Okay. So hip issues in the United States. So from 1990 to 2019, there has been an actual increase in global age standardized incident rate and disability adjusted life years for hip osteoarthritis, which means there's increased hip osteoarthritis like diagnosis is basically. Okay. So it increased from 17 major hip issues per 100,000 to now it's 18, which isn't that huge a deal, but the knowledge that we have, shouldn't it go the other way? You know what I mean? Now you could say maybe we're diagnosing it quicker. That could be a thing. But the arthritis is getting diagnosed. Usually at this stage, it's when somebody's going to get a hip replacement. So, but over time, you think with time, technology, understanding, you would actually have a reduction in the amount of hip replacements per 100,000 people, right? You'd think that, but it's very common. So basically what's happened is it stayed the same the entire time. Okay. All right. Here's the other one, total hip replacement. So this one could be a, thing of just because of time and now the simplicity of actually hip replacement. It's much easier procedure a lot of times than it used to be. Like when I started practice 10 years ago or 4 years ago, the 10 years prior to this, it was horrific to get your hip done. So a lot of people avoided it. Now they have robotics and a lot of different things, and where the hip replacement isn't as painful as it used to be. Problem is we haven't really figured out a solution to stop the hip replacement, right? So that's what we're aiming to do tonight. So in total hip replacement in the United States, the prevalence of hip replacements has significantly increased over time, with an estimated 2.5 million Americans having a total hip replacement in 2010. But that is just in 2010, and it has gone up since then. So that was just the data from then. Okay, so there's a reason I'm telling you all this so that you can understand you're not alone. The medical, all of us, even chiropractic, we can't say, hey, we've done such a great job. We've reduced the amount of hip replacements needed because people understand how it goes for that many years, right? So that's what we're hoping we can start preventing some of that stuff. Okay, so this is what I want you to focus on tonight. I want you to watch it, and then we're going to go through some ways to holistically look at this, okay? So this is what, according to the medical literature, why these would happen. Now, a lot of you are going to be very familiar with a lot of the ways this is because we're told this all the time. But I want to show you that there's different perspective, okay? So what are the most common reasons for hip arthritis, according to medical literature? Primary cause, aging. Aging is the most significant risk factor for osteoarthritis. As people age, the cartilage that cushions the joints can wear down, leading to osteoarthritis. The natural wear and tear of joint over time contributes to this degenerative condition. What if I told you that I had a patient, Dr. Geimer can attest to this as well. We had a patient walk in, and she was 93. It was her first time ever seeing a chiropractor because her friend told her she should have done it years ago. She never really had any pain. She had a little back problem. So we x-rayed her, and she had 0 arthritis in her low back. 0. To the point where Dr. Geimer came and got me and had me take a look at this x-ray because we couldn't believe what we were seeing. Why? Because whatever, we don't know why, right? But the beauty and the nature of, she had a lot of great habits, very low stress environment life, very happy, good, positive outcome. However, aging might not be the only reason for arthritis, even though it is a big part of it. Aging doesn't have to be an end all be all for arthritis. So just remember that in degenerative conditions, because you can regenerate your body. That's the thing that, people don't understand. Okay. So the next primary cause, according to medical, is joint damage, which that kind of makes sense to most of you. Previous injuries, trauma, you fell on your hip, some kind of trauma happens to the hip, which kind of accelerates the healing process, which part of the healing process is formation of bone. Okay. So arthritis, degenerative arthritis, is actually a healing mechanism. So think about that as we go forward, because once we start talking the holistic stuff, that's going to be important. So remember, when you're building up arthritis, it's actually an end stage of old healing. Okay. So just remember that. Here, congenital or developmental conditions. So congenital means you were born with it, and there's this stuff called hip dysplasia, which this is more common than most people understand. But when you're born, the ball in the socket of the hip, so you have the socket that's in your pelvis, and you got the ball that kind of falls in there. Some people, the hip dysplasia, the socket isn't as deep, right? So it's not as deep. And then what happens is that hip either has a lot more freer movement, or, it just doesn't place in there right, leading to some kind of arthritis a little quicker than most people do. So that makes sense if you had some kind of congenital thing or it's not formed correctly. Obesity is the number 4, they say. However, I don't see this as much, to be honest with you. I don't understand. I get it, what they're saying, I guess, because there's more weight on that joint. However, I don't see the difference between this and a skinny guy or a skinny lady. I don't. I see different I see arthritis in both pretty significantly. So I don't know if that is an actual thing. Maybe it advances it a little quicker where you have that. But the reason I'm kind of slapping back it is I don't want my people that are like thinner thinking, oh, I'm never going to get an arthritic hip. And we'll show you why a lot of times through the holistic reason why that could happen. All right. So this is some other things that could happen. What are the most common reasons for hip arthritis according to medical literature? The risk factors. Okay. So I want us to go here a little bit because this one starts making you think of holistic type situations. We want to know what could cause it over time. Okay. So genetics, we're going to talk about that. I'm going to show you why that could be a thing, right? But it's not from what you think, okay? Amy probably knows where I'm going with that. Occupational lifestyle factors, that's a big one. Big one we're going to talk about tonight. Many of us have jobs that you're on your feet for 40 hours a week or more, right? Wearing work boots that may or may not be the most effective thing. Sometimes they even have these steel toe things that doesn't allow you the gait of your foot to actually go correctly. And so a lot of times you can see my nurses are going like 25,000 steps a day. And then they'll lift somebody in between there and then walk some more. Right. So there's a lot of variables on occupational and lifestyle stuff that we'd like to talk about that can lead to a lot of the hip degeneration and those kind of things. Other diseases is another one. Like you got some rheumatoid, gout, some different disorders can do that. Bone density is kind of a interesting one. Based on a lot of some of our sedentary lifestyle. So if you sit a lot at work and that is a big part of what you do, you will cause your own stuff because your bone density won't be up there based on what? The innate intelligence of the human body. The innate intelligence, if you're not going to use those hips, it'll use that bone somewhere else. It's not going to keep it there, right? So that's one of the major things to remember. Your body does a very good job of, if you don't use it, you lose it. Sex difference. The reason that's a big deal is just a lot of formation of the pelvis is much different shape in different walks of life, not only just female and male. But there is a much different shape. And sometimes that shape has a hard time, with occupational work. So like a physical work might hit somebody different based on the shape of their pelvis, actually. So that makes sense. And then previous joints and surgeries, always do it. This is almost a guaranteed advancement, because what happens is the surgeries are, again, they're trying to take care of a problem at the time, but they're not looking at the rest of it. Let's say you had a left knee injury when you were in high school. Okay. So the ACL tear. So then you had to go in, get the surgery done. I can almost guarantee you sometime that you're going to have a hip problem on the opposite side. And the reason is because when the surgical thing gets done, you're fixing a problem that may be a painful condition at the time, but we never go through the mechanics. We never fix those mechanics to the level that you need to. Therefore, the rest of your body's going to mess around. So I want to just get all of those in there as medical literature, as the next part is going to be the good stuff, where we're going to look at all of these things holistically. Okay. Oh yeah, I forgot. This is pretty long because that's why I didn't have a lot going. Okay. So what are the most common reasons for hip arthritis? Continued again. So why does it happen? According to medical stuff, cartilage breakdown. So the wear and tear of this little cartilage joint starts to happen. We work it so much that the cartilage starts to break down. Once that cartilage starts to break down, the healing process happens. Remember that. I'm kind of preempting you. So make sure this healing process is happening in that hip. And once it's got to that chronic area, it's like, okay, well, all these chronic inflammation cells are constantly around me all the time. This is the hip talking to you. And because these guys, Jeremy's not doing nothing about it, I might as well just start building bone, because he's not going to use it anymore, because he keeps having these cells come that are inflammation cells. So he's not going to use it right. Well, let's just get rid of it for him. And so that is the healing process that happens with inflammation. And when you have chronic inflammation in an area, subchondral bone changes is another part that happens in that hip. So beneath the cartilage, subchondral bone, which is just the bone underneath there, can undergo some, how do I word this? Just different changes in the bone. Sometimes you can get a cyst in there. You can get a bone cyst. That's another thing. And that can mess with the shape of the hip, and those kind of things. And then when we get to the last one, it's called synovial inflammation, which is the inflammation around it. You'd probably call it hip bursitis-ish. It's very, very similar to that. But remember, what we're going to do, the biggest thing and the biggest key of this mechanism is chronic inflammation. Okay. In the hip itself. All right. So now we're going to talk about the cool stuff. I think, Amy, this will be it. Sweet. Okay. So now you know all the medical stuff, and everybody struggles with that. And then they're like, oh, it's arthritis. You're screwed. Just go home. Go home, get in a wheelchair. It's fine. Here's some pills. That's what we always do. And then we find out later, you're like, maybe I could actually do something about this prior to, or just wait it out. It'll be fine. We'll just get the metal one eventually. Just don't do nothing. Just keep eating these pain things until you can't do that anymore. And I wish I was joking. Unfortunately, I was like, the rare few that take me up on, like chiropractic wise, which is getting bigger and bigger every day. So I get all excited, but people are understanding how this works. It's not the end all. We just have to make sure that we're going to that next level, right? We're going to that level where we start taking care of these things. And especially, hopefully tonight, you'll get the knowledge to, okay, I was diagnosed with this hip arthritis. What do I do next? Right. And so that's what tonight's kind of about as well. So let's start with what they said in the beginning. Is hip arthritis degenerative arthritis of the hip because your grandpa had it? Could be, right? And the reason I say could be is because remember the process of epigenetics. Remember that? Remember the process of what that means? So epigenetics, if you want to go back, watch one of our videos on it. Epigenetics is the ability of your body to turn on the program and turn off the programs of your actual genetic code. So what happens, think of who you watched. You watched your parents, you watched your grandparents. Those are the people that you learned to walk from. The mechanics, the program that you learned to walk and do those things is that, okay? So that's why as you walk, you might look like your grandfather, or as you walk, you might look like your dad, like as those kind of things. It's a program. It's a learned conscious program. I heard something today, Amy. Oh my God. So good. Your subconscious mind is manifested because with your body. So the way you can tell what your subconscious is doing is your body movements. Isn't that interesting? I thought that was so fascinating. I may have messed that up, but the subconscious mind, if you watch somebody walk, it's very interesting. Because when you're a baby, so if you remember back, and we won't go too deep in the woods on this because we'll probably have to do another epigenetics one anyway. Remember, when you're a baby, when you're born, it's age 0 to 6 years old. In that 0 to 6, our brains are basically a tape recorder. Okay. So it's a tape recorder as that's happening. So this baby is looking around and it's recording every interaction, every emotion, every movement, every pattern that you could possibly imagine from age like 0 to 6 years old. From 6, all of a sudden, that's when we start to replay the pattern. Okay. So we restart from 6 and on, we stop record. We still record, obviously, but we stop in this thing. We push off on the record, and then we start playing. So now we're playing it back. If you ever want to understand this in a huge, great detail, I just sent an interview link to see if he'll do it with me. But Dr. Bruce Lipton, who created it, or who actually discovered epigenetics years ago, or it made it even more profound. You can turn it on and off your genes. So a lot of times, if we can change our programming, maybe change the way we walk, maybe this hip degeneration isn't genetic, it's a pattern. Okay. So if we break that pattern, it could be really, really good. All right. Is it joint damage? Okay. So this is the next one. Is it joint damage? And why is that joint damage occurring? Okay. So let's go through that. So if there's joint damage occurring, which was what we talked about, like walking, having a heavy factory job, using a heavy work boot, falling on it, why is that happening where the joint damage continually is present until it starts building bone to create arthritis in the hip? You would say feet mechanics could be a thing that we'll go over tonight. Spine mechanics is a huge one. So your spine working properly, your pelvis working properly, all those kind of things. Your walking gait mechanics we'll talk about. That's where the genetics comes in. Because what if, people didn't even know my name was Jeremy for years because my nickname was Duck because I waddled the whole time. And the reason that happened is that's the mechanics I learned to walk with. Caused myself a knee problem, right? And then I had to learn how to walk correctly. And now I actually walk better based on once you have that knee problem. Sometimes if it's that painful, you're like, yep, I'm going to learn. And so I learned pretty quickly, how to do proper mechanics. Now you always go back to that old program. So it's a constant fight until your body learns that behavior. Right. So we talked about that, like work boots, sitting is a huge joint damage issue, because when you have the joint damage happening, we don't think of sitting, but so many jobs, people are sitting for like 7-8 hours a day, twisting, using their hips for everything. And all of a sudden there's just not the strength there to get up and down from that sitting position. We got to do a lot more there. And then of course, physical stresses. So understanding the why the joint damage is occurring in your life is a huge deal. Okay. So let's say you come in and you're, let's say it's Amy, and Amy comes in and she starts having a hip problem. Okay. So the first thing a holistic doctor is going to do is not say, hey, it's arthritis, and your dad had it, so you're done. That's not what we have to do. We have to figure out what in her environment, her ergonomics, what could be causing it, right? And so a lot of times we'll start going through and evaluating that way. For Amy, she works on a lot of people, massage, stretching, gua sha, like a lot of techniques. So she's on her feet quite a bit, like doing stuff. But what also happens when you're on your feet and twisted just right, that could cause you some issues. So making sure everything's lined up and spinally good could be the answer to why her hip was hurting, right? Another person can come in and they just worked 72 hours a week, on a factory floor, and they lifted the same part 1,000 times over, never moved their feet, but they twisted a lot. That would do it, right? And so we have to think of different approaches for your lifestyle. That's how you fix it. And that's one of the biggest mistakes we have is physical therapy isn't a one thing, any kind of therapy isn't a one-time thing. When this hip starts happening, we have to evaluate our whole life and then see what scenario makes us better, in each one of those. So we'll go through a little bit of those. Is this hip issue, could it be from something chemically? Right? Okay, so let's talk about that. What do I mean by chemically? So remember, in chiropractic, nature needs no help. It just needs no interference, right? And so with those, we are trying to build this body. This body has a perfect innate intelligence within it. And within it, as long as we don't get in its way, we have a really good shot at having really good healing. And so one of the things that can get in our way is inflammatory things, inflammatory chemicals, because there's these, all your major joints that take a lot of thing is that's where your inflammation will sit. Okay. So your hip has a bunch of inflammation cells around it and it doesn't want to be inflamed, right? If it gets inflamed, then we start having hip issues. So one of the major keys is to make sure that maybe we are not eating foods that cause inflammation. Okay. So that could be a very, very big deal to some people. And I've actually seen it happen. I've seen inflammation because somebody they had a high inflammatory food processes, which is processed food, sugar, gluten, you name all the stuff you're not supposed to have, right? All of you kind of know, and the 1% tribe know eating clean. But understanding staying eating clean is a really, really big deal when you're dealing with a chronic inflamed hip, chronic inflamed shoulder. It all matters, because if those inflammation markers are there, they're going to go to the area of injury, right? So that is a big deal. And then, Amy, I'm going to put in, so this is the part where before we talk the mechanics and stuff. And then so remember in chiropractic, you get thoughts, toxins, trauma. So we've already did joint damage, which would be like trauma, right? Ergonomics, that would be a trauma, right? You have chemical, which is inflammation markers, crappy food could have a problem. Now we're going to do thoughts. And so this one, I absolutely love this. You can have mental processes do it, right? So So this is where Amy comes in her psyche. So, Amy, what is the hip say a little bit? We can come back to it too if you want, kid.
It's okay. It'll just take me a second to find it. Did you read the stuff that I sent?
I did. I should.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's hips in general and hip disorders. I'll just read hips in general.
Yeah, do that.
They hold my body in perfect balance and are located between the pelvis and the femur. I lean on my hips. My hips enable my legs to move in order to make my body move forward. They determine whether I move forward or not. They represent my basic beliefs about what my relations with the world are or should be. The hips contain my positioning about living, either based on myself or based on others and how they perceive me. As the pelvis and the hips form a whole, they represent my striding forth in life. The hips, therefore, also represent my level of determination for advancing in life. I accept to move forward in life joyfully, confidently, knowing that everything is an experience to help me discover my inner riches.
Awesome. So that's the one process that we talk about with this epigenetics is you have these subconscious programs, and a lot of them, for a lot of you that haven't heard, like what we're talking about tonight, you can have subconscious programs manifest as issues throughout your body. Okay. And so it doesn't mean that you can have subconscious thoughts kind of throwing you out. And one of the best parts of, chiropractic is you're looking at all of these different things, not just the one, not just this one issue, right? When we see this hip kind of coming in there, let's look at all of these things. So the mental aspect is what she's saying, balance in life. It makes total sense. It's not like a big stone throw away from like what you're talking about, right? Balance and moving forward, hips, right? So maybe that's a big thing that's a challenge in your life at that point. You could have a manifestation of a hip issue that could pop up on you. Okay. So just remember that. We'll talk more about that one as well, because 2025 will be really fun that way. We'll start diving into the epigenetics, hopefully, of all these different emotional triggers. Shoulder means something else. And that's why, when you go to an acupuncturist or somebody, you have these different pains, that could pop up, and then they ask you these questions. And you're like, whoa, how did you know that? Well, because it's that way, right? So that's what's so neat about the emotional connection. So let's look at all of them. Are you happy with the direction you're going? Are you going forward in what you want to do? Maybe by looking at that, the hip goes away. I have several stories on that. So this is no joke. I've had a headache, a chronic migraine person. As soon as we figured that out, the biggest thing on those is the patient, or, the person with it has to be able to accept it. Like, not that there's something wrong with them, that it could be that, and then start doing the work, right? Because a lot of people either think that's a little out there to woo-woo kind of situation. It's not, though. Feel the stress of what happens and how your body feels after just being stressed out, or how good your body feels when you have like a glorious day. Those are all big things, right? And your physical manifestation of those things will happen. So understanding them better could make you that much better in health overall. So just leave that at that. All right. Okay. So now let me get into, this is where I pulled a bunch of videos. So I'll try to do it really quick, if that works. I'm not very quick about much, but we're going to do a little bit. We're going to start before we get into what we're going to do. Okay. Because this is like our final thing, because I got some really cool stuff. I want to show you what the good foot gait looks like and some good stretches, and let's go through that first. Okay. So as we go, we'll do the videos maybe at the end. I didn't know where to put these in. That's the problem, because I get all excited about, I told you all this stuff out there, and then it's like, and then I'm like, okay, let's get on to the good stuff. So here's one that's really simple. one of the things that we're going to talk about is when you have a hip problem, almost all the time, it is not the hip itself. The hip is usually the reaction. So what they call this is the point of pain. This, like, because you have a foot, a knee, a hip, and a spine, all of those things, and your hip is actually in the middle of all those things working properly, right? It's not the first thing to hit the ground. It's not the last thing to move. So this hip is kind of stuck. It does what it does in reaction to the other joints of the human body, if that makes sense. One of the things that I've always noticed is usually I can find things, especially in people's feet. Okay. Mechanics of the feet are super important. For those that don't know, we adjust, like chiropractors adjust feet all the time. Sorry, I just got knocked off of our thing. Making sure we're still live on her. Okay, there we go. So the feet are one of those big situations that the mechanics, because there's 24 bones or more in your feet, and they all have to move in one flowing motion. Over time, you do enough steps on feet that don't work right, your hip is going to have a major issue. And that's why I love like evaluating and adjusting feet. And a lot of chiropractors understand this. It's critical to understand how your foot is moving. That leads up to, if your foot's not working right, and then your knee possibly couldn't work right? Because then all of a sudden the mechanics of your knee would be messed up. And then you'd get up to the biggest joint. The reason the hip is so big and powerful and strong is because the innate intelligence of your body knows that our feet mechanics are probably going to be off if we're wearing Converse shoes that my daughter was wearing for years, and it drove me nuts because they're like the biggest. They're good looking. They're like fancy, but they had nothing in them, right? So no mechanical advantage, and kids should, like, these shoes were terrible. They were like driving me nuts. Like, but it was the thing to wear, right? At school. Well, when she'd wear crappy shoes like that, I could tell you could have a mechanical issue up into the knees and the hips and those kind of things. So immediately that could be something that you have to look at. So with that being said, one of the ways I want us to think in terms of protecting our hips at all times, whether you're in that mode of worried about you're going to have a hip issue, or you're just starting down, or you're just kind of like wanting to make sure it doesn't happen. Let's start adding major feet strengthening things into our routine, because that is the ultimate spring. It's the ultimate, the situation that keeps protecting your hips from the ground up. So I suggest, and some of my adults are not going to have done this in years, go tiptoe down your hallway. Like tiptoe, like you're sneaking up on somebody. Do some tiptoeing down your hallway once or twice, because we don't use our calves very often. And so what happens is, like, because we don't use our calves, we don't build those strength of those feet. So this could be a very simple thing that you could do to, start getting that foot strength back. Obviously, I love barefoot walking. Barefoot walking is a fantastic one. Should be huge right now. Everybody's like getting some grounding mats and stuff. I was like, if you've been with us in 1% Tribe, we were talking about that a year ago or more. At least we've talked about, barefoot in the yard is grounding. Okay. And you're actually feeling the same exact scenario by doing that. And you're strengthening your feet too. So that's always good. Jump rope is my favorite. Okay. So jump rope is one of my favorites, as you go for hips, because it's a recoil situation, and the hip, we want to make the spring recoil start to happen again. And honestly, the older you are, the more I want you to get into and learn and do jump ropes, because most of you will find out, especially my retired people, you probably can't do it, and it probably hurts like crazy to do it. Okay. So even with no rope, start doing the motion of doing that so that you can actually jump rope again. It's a game changer. I'm telling you right now, that little exercise could do so much for you, especially as long as you're, like as you're going, you're going to try to get those. It'll be fantastic. This is the other one that we have to start doing well. Okay. So when I talk about when we're on our feet a lot, so my working population that's working or sitting a lot, we must do something to move our hips beyond the work. Okay. So a lot of people will say, hey, I work 60 hours a week on my feet all the time. I don't need to work out my legs. That is the opposite of what's true. You actually have to work them out more, because if we don't have the strength in our hips and the strength in our butt and our legs, a lot of times that 60 hours, that's when the inflammation can arise. It can start creating major issues. So a lot of times, make sure you're doing things to strengthen those legs at all times. Okay. So one of my favorites is body squats, just doing freaking body squats after work until your legs burn. That's a really, really good way to do stuff. Just get to a point where it goes, okay, I've done enough. Haha. My legs are kind of on fire. That's enough. Your body felt the strength going there. That's as fast as that is. It takes 3 minutes to do something like that. Okay. The other one I really like is walking with a partner. Now, the reason I say that is because if we go back to what we were talking about with the program, okay, the reason a lot of people have hip arthritis, and they think it's because it's genetic because their grandpa had it, is because they walk exactly like their grandpa did, right? But if you have a partner that you guys can learn together what proper foot mechanics looks like and walking gait, you can help each other by, raise your feet up a little bit, like watching them walk. Don't lean so far one direction, right? These are huge values that you can do in just having a partner to walk with. And it's fantastic that way. Just those by itself could probably reverse 80% of the things before it gets to a bad thing. However, we have to do them. Okay. Tiptoe walking down your hallway, guys. I'm not kidding. That will strengthen those hips. It will. It's kind of hilarious to try it when you haven't done it in years, but it's one of those things to try though. Okay. All right. So then I'm going to go through this, and then we'll go through some stretches, some small stretching videos that I saw that were pretty cool. So fix your work shoes. Make sure that you get those like custom feet, like get them really well fitted to you. You might not have it. You might have issues of where you have to wear steel toe or something like that. My biggest recommendation, and I see it all the time, my guys that work that kind of job and has a steel-toed shoe get so comfortable in those that they actually wear them all the time. So they actually wear work boots outside of their work because they're old work boots or whatever, right? Because it feels like the support is there. Okay. The support, that sounds fine in all theory, but really they should be my first barefoot people. They should be getting out of those work shoes and doing barefoot stuff, because one of the things that happens is the steel toe doesn't. So if you look at your gait, if you kind of imagine, and we've done this in a video as well. So if you have your first toe is your first movement in your first step. So your big toe lifts, and then your foot kind of rolls to the side of the foot, and then it pushes off. Well, in a steel toe type boot, that doesn't allow that. So what happens is the whole foot comes up and it comes down, and then it keeps doing that all day. Well, then they get used to that walk, right? The person that's wearing them gets used to that walk, and then work boots are comfy all the time. So a lot of times it could actually be a huge detriment of wearing a really solid orthotic shoe after you've worked. So changing that up to where it's a very free-flowing barefoot situation would be huge, huge difference there. Okay. Well, yeah. Let's keep going. I'll show you a couple of the stretches at the end. All right. So, because I don't want to keep you guys all night, because I could. Amy knows that. All right. So the nutrition part. Nutrition is very interesting. Remember, we go back. Now, the reason I made you talk about that was inflammation. Inflammation just doesn't show up in the hip just because. Okay. It's not like, oh, let's throw some inflammation on that little hip there. That's not how it works. There's something happening. There's some kind of injury occurring that the inflammation wants to go to that hip, right? Why are you got inflaming cells in there? Because it's trying to repair something that you broke. You don't call it, the mechanics aren't just hanging around. So think of inflammation as like the mechanics. Okay. They're not hanging around at your other hip. Why aren't they hanging out there? Right. When you get this inflammation process going, that means there's some major issues in there of damage or something else. Or it could be that your diet's so junk that you've done so much inflammatory process that we got to reverse that. So there's these things, you can look them up. We can put it in the thing, non-inflammatory diets. Okay. Non-inflammatory diets are just staying away from a lot of the processed food, processed sugar things. Once you do that, those inflammatory markers start to go away. That's why it's more important than ever, especially in the food choices we get to have nowadays, to make sure we're eating clean. A lot of times people will be like, oh, I see this one a lot with my skinny people. So my skinny guys that are like working all the time, they're like, I'm skinny. I worked a farm, 400 acres at a farm. I can do sugar. I can do as much Mountain Dew as I want to. That's not true. And some of them have the worst hips I've ever seen because the inflammation process gets out of control. And once that inflammation process gets out of control, it's not normal. And so arthritis starts to set in. If you don't believe me, that is a big, huge part of it, is the inflammation becomes chronic inside there. And then after the cells, swelling and inflammation are your first step. But if it's going to stay there for a really long time, it says to the rest of the body, it's just too much out of control. I'm going to start making it fuse together so he can't use this anymore because it's asking for too much inflammation. That's how degenerative arthritis starts. That's the real reason it happens. Okay. So the big thing is look up or do an anti-inflammatory diet. That's very good. Now we can talk about some good stuff to take along with that. That's amazing. Curcuminoids. So curcuminoids are your turmeric, ginger, bromelain, those food spices. That could be a really good supplement to start on your journey. I found a couple cool ones too, Amy, tonight. That was the cool thing. I was like, whoa. That's why the video might come later. I might do the hip thing later, but I'll show them a couple stretches though before we leave. But so curcumin, so all these anti-inflammatories are super important to do always. So we want to make sure we do those. To do cartilage, to improve and help the cartilage, it's been a struggle in the scientific literature. There's sort of some good info. There's a lot of times not. So sometimes, just be careful of a lot of the supplements that, for $100 a month, I'll fix all your cartilage. That's a big, huge misnomer. There's some good ones out there. Just don't fall for that stuff. Okay, so cartilage, collagen broths, right? Bone broth. You hear that one a lot right now. So bone broth, I wish I would have introduced that years ago when we started the gut health process. I should have been on top. We would have been bazillionaires doing this, Amy, and our studio would be massive. All right. Glucosamine and chondroitin, that's the one that's in the literature saying it helps. If you don't do the anti-inflammatory part of this with the curcuminoids, it doesn't matter. And that's one of the biggest frustrations I have is everybody starts glucosamine and chondroitin, and then I ask, how's your diet? And they're like, crappy. So I'm like, okay, well, I wish that's not in the instructions of glucosamine and chondroitin because they're trying to sell you whatever, right? So you need to do those step by step first, right? if you're walking with a limp, maybe fix the mechanics of that, get a little stronger, those kind of things. Then maybe some anti-inflammatory, make sure your body's going to be okay to actually heal that. Okay. Glucosamine and Glucosamine are pretty good. One that does have some good information is omega-3 fatty acids, which are typically one is fish oil. Fish oil, any kind of oils is really good for joints. Remember that. So like olive oil on a salad, think a joint, like you're oiling your joints, like the Tin Man. It's very similar. Think that way. Those oils that are really good for you, they're typically really good for your joints because that's the kind of fluid that we kind of need in those joints. So that allows something. And one that's big, this one I haven't talked a lot about because we haven't got to this subject yet as much, but because this one's a very powerful drug in the mental health world, or I'm sorry, it's a powerful herb, but it's called SAM-E. So SAM-E is said to be really, really good, possibly for cartilage. That one's kind of out there, but not a lot of things hit that cartilage because it's a lot harder to, get blood supply to and everything else. So, and then the last one's called MSM, which is methyl sulfomethane. MSN is a really good one that they've shown to have that as well. So those are some good herbs that are out there for your hip. And then the last and final one that I didn't know, which is really awesome, vitamin C. Vitamin C is really good. Did you know that one, Amy?
No, did not.
I was like, oh no, there's another one in my herbal thing that's fantastic. I got it underneath this, but it's vitamin C is really good for collagen formation. So that could be really good for your kids too. Just making sure, if you do have a history of this arthritis in your family where you had a hip replacement early, make sure your kids are getting vitamin C in them, right? It'll help them. And so that's knowledge is power at that point. And I almost forgot about this one because it's one of my favorites for this topic, but Boswellia. Boswellia is a really good herb for giving you cartilage and hip support. But just remember, if this inflammation process is in that hip, these aren't going to make your hip pain go away. This is to kind of help regenerate that cartilage. So I see that mistake all the time. Okay. All right. Oh, okay. So this one, I thought this would be good. This is too big for tonight. Dang it. So the mental piece, there's a lot like Psyche, Amy knows, just recognizing what kind of situation you're in, in life can be a really nice, way. Say, hey, oh, maybe I am trying to figure out my direction to life. Maybe I'm not as balanced as I want to be. Maybe writing down some key goals for yourself, or, there's a lot of good ways to, attack that. And I would talk to Amy about those because like that Psyche stuff is fantastic. So Amy, you want to go through, should we go through a couple stretches? I got them, but maybe we've overdone our welcome.
How long are they? Are they short?
They're kind of short. So let's do those guys. And then, so you guys aren't like totally wiped out. And so they're pretty quick and I can't show, I don't want to get like copyright striked. So I'm going to show you really quick. They're very basic, but everyday stretches like these could make you not have a hip replacement. Just let you know. All right. But you got to start now, right? Okay. So we're going to go. Let's do that. And then let's do. Okay. She's fantastic. Promote her.
Not after a specific surgery. So make sure you're clear.
Hang on, I got an idea.
So
that'll help. Okay. So as she's laying, hopefully you guys can see that. Yeah, it looks like you can. So this one's pretty basic. Let's see if she can get to it. Okay. So she's just bringing knee to chest here. Okay. So if you're at that point, it sounds crazy, but most of these are fantastic for that exact reason. Okay. They're very good. These little tiny ones. Here's another one. Not crisscross applesauce, but just putting those feet together and bringing them in. Sounds so crazy how hard those can be, but they're not terrible. This is the one I show all the time. I'm going to keep moving so you guys aren't here all night. This is a kind of what they call a piriformis stretch. She's doing a different version. I usually grab the other leg. She's bringing that leg towards her, and that really gets in there. Oh, okay. We can do a lot on this video. All right. So you see that one. And then we're going to go into, this is one of my favorites that she's going to do. It's called the iliopsoas. And I'll show you this little muscle in there. So the iliopsoas is like a deep, so she's going to get in the front. She's saying it hits in that front. However, if you do this correctly, this actually gets in the deep inner muscles of the hip itself. So it's very simple, but you just stand up as high, as tall as you can over your hip, and you go forward. Okay. All right. And you will feel a really good stretch in there. So let me go. Oh, darn it. Playlist. All right. All right. We're going to do this again. So let's do. I want to show you what that iliopsoas looks like. Oh, here's a good one. This one's pretty quick. This looks so dumb. However, it's really stinking good. This one's the iliopsoas, or this is called the psoas. And all she's doing is putting something underneath that front. Ah, darn it. That moved a little too quick. All right. Stop. Oh. Let me go to the next one.
You can't peek on it.
All right. This is a guy. If you guys ever want a really good channel to follow, Dr. Berg is really good. He puts a lot of stuff out. So this is what I wanted to show you. If you guys can see it. So the iliopsoas, if you can see, he's drawing it, but these muscles attach in those hips, but they also are spinal related. So a lot of times with that spine, you have this muscle that kind of like will attach in there. And that's why it's super important for that type of stretch. All right. I'm trying to think of any other. Yeah, I think that's okay. We'll do a part 2. We'll do a part 2 because there are so many good hip things out there that I just came across so many. But the anatomy of the hip, just remember the reason we did it this way tonight is I really need you to get your mindset right when you have the hip issue. So why is your hip hurting? You know, if it keeps happening the same way, something we're doing ergonomically is wrong, right? And so we need to start looking at those and starting with something real basic, like starting to walk stronger, like get moving, jump rope, you know, tiptoe, get some inflammation stuff out of your world. You know, the biggest mistake I see with hips, I'll be honest, it's always, you know, some hardworking dude that's worked his whole life for 25 years and now his hip really hurts, but he drinks 7 Mountain Dews a week and, you know, eats like crap also, but very strong, constantly at work, you know, like he's done a lot of good things, but he hasn't set himself up for that success he needs to do at the end. So just remember that as we go. Hopefully that made sense. How'd it go, Amy, you think?
Good.
Yeah. All right, cool. That was a lot of info though. That was the only bad thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was looking at it afterwards. I'm like, oh crap. So So I apologize to everyone if that was too much overload. Remember, you can always go to Rumble channel and watch a recording and like slow it down or, get that information again. We also have the podcast, which is really cool. So that the Prize Inside on Spotify. But other than that, we won't keep you tonight. Just want to keep you informed. I'm reaching out to a few. I'm hoping I get a couple of these interviews that I've been lining up. But that is the time that it's going to happen. So, hi, Sadie. How's it going? Sadie's doing awesome. All right. Well, I will end it here tonight. And anybody have any questions? We're pretty good on the questions, it looks like. Maybe you're good?
Yep, I'm good.
Okay, cool. So, all right. Well, we may not see you next week. If the Super Bowl's next weekend, we are out. But I'll make
Looks
sure.
Looks like it is.
Yeah. So if it's out, then that's when Super Bowl will happen. So you guys have a great couple weeks. Don't forget Wednesday night, I'm doing the whole Health Weekly where we go over like newest and greatest information. My last one was pretty interesting. Tells you how the GLP-1 medicine works. So if you want to find that out, go to that show. It's pretty good. But other than that, you guys have a great night. Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.